I'll have to live with the fact that it's got a little hole. So we'll start off with a bit of history. The Gympie Agricultural, Mining and Pastoral Society was formed on the 12th of April 1877 after a successful champion ploughing match had been held on St Patrick's Day, 17th of March that year. The first exhibition was held on 16th to the 17th of October 1877, exactly 10 years after the discovery of gold at Gympie by John Nash. And I hope everyone's sufficiently familiar with Queensland geography to know that Gympie is a modestly sized town now, about 100 miles, I would say, north of Brisbane. I don't know what that is in kilometres exactly. Prize certificates that were given at this show, and they were specially designed and presented. The second show was held on the 19th and 20th of June 1878, and silver cups and silver and bronze medals were competed for. The first medals were not manufactured till mid-August that year, when the treasurer of the society had a silver and a bronze specimen to show, according to newspaper reports of the time. Next one. So, don't know how clear that is for you. It's a bit out of focus where I am.
This is a silver medal.
Right, that's fine.
Yes.
Yes, a silver medal.
Aurelia Gold Mining Company for gold specimens, 1879. So Gympie was founded on gold, so this is particularly significant that it's for gold specimens. Next one, please. There's the medal again. Mr. H.L. Davis of Brisbane was described in a newspaper report as the manufacturer of the medals, which were in fact struck by the Sydney branch of the Royal Mint, with die sinking by Brisbane's Robert Kapner, whose initials appear on both the reverse and the obverse. Next one, please. There's H.L. Davis, perhaps not too clear by H.L. Davis, Brisbane. Not all that sharp.
Once you know what it says, you can see it.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to hear that. The report of the Gympie exhibition in the Gympie Times and Mary River Mining Gazette, which is a newspaper, shows that 8 silver and 7 bronze medals were awarded over 12 sections. So there's not a lot of these medals issued even at the time. Just put that on to the next one if you wouldn't mind. Thanks. On the left hand, the far, your right of the screen, you can see RCF, which is Robert Kapner, Fachet. So Robert Kapner made me. Next one, please. Again, the middle, and at the bottom, under the little dot under the wreath, RC. Over the times that the medals that Kapner made, he used a number of ways of designating his work. Just his initials, RCF. He also used RC and a capital S and C, so Sculpsit. So he did the die sinking on those as well. So they're the 3 designations that I know for his work. Next one. There we are again, a bit closer. Look at the R.C. Another one. Oh, here's HL. Can you see that a little bit clearer? You'll note there's some harsh life evident in the rim work of the medal, but fortunately those rim nicks came at no extra cost. All right, the 1879 exhibition was again held in June, and the same newspaper reported on the 7th of June and the 11th of June that a total of 18 silver and 12 bronze medals were awarded over 14 sections that year. And on the 5th of April 1879, the same newspaper reported that, and this is a quote, the die with which this year's medals were struck off had been purchased by the society. So our friends at the society have now got control of the dye. Some committee members were not overly enthused about this, and concerns were raised in the newspapers that there would be difficulty in obtaining sufficient pressure on Gympie to stamp the medals. But the President gave it as his, and I'll quote, his emphatic opinion that with the assistance of any of the local 3 bank managers, okay, sufficient pressure could be obtained to stamp any medal of any kind of metal it was possible to imagine. So in Gympie, they weren't given to understatement, apparently.
Whatever it takes.
Exactly. So I see the heading up there was who was H.L. Davis. So I'll jump ahead a little bit to on my paper and say that Henry Lee Davis advertised in Gympie in February 1879 as a practical watch and clock manufacturer, optician and manufacturing jeweller, with premises at 97 Queen Street, adjoining the Australian Hotel, Brisbane, with a manufactory in Elizabeth Street. He had had a business in Brisbane since 1876, and from newspaper reports he had a close connection to the mining industry, which in those days included opals, sapphires and emeralds. Today we think of coal, silver and lead, zinc, that sort of thing, but in those days that's what mainly they were talking about. This probably explains how he became involved in having the dyes made and medals struck off for the Gympie Agricultural Mining and Pastoral Society. In 1888 he had an office in Ipswich, where in 1897 he also conducted services at the Baptist Church while the minister was on his honeymoon. So our friend Mr. Davis, who's attributed to striking off this medal and his skills in opals, sapphires and emeralds, complemented that by his ability to preach at the Baptist Church. So he's a man of many talents. Newspaper reports that he donated medals to the Presbyterian Sabbath Scripture Union, the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Boys Brigade. In 1886, H.L. Davis & Co. Limited was listed among the companies traded on the Brisbane Stock Exchange. By June 1891, unfortunately he had lost money speculating in mining companies, and a trustee was appointed to realise on his assets and pay what creditors he could. In 1892, advertisements showed that N. Mandelson, a name I'm not familiar with, was described as his successor in the jewellery business. Next one, please. So I wonder if you could go back to Kapner. Would that be all right? All right. Who was Robert Kapner? Robert Kapner was residing in Brisbane, according to newspaper reports, of his when his 9-month-old son George died in February 1870. Remember, this is 1878. He must have started engraving the dies for the Brisbane Grammar School's Lily Medal in 1869, because by the 24th of February 1870, wax impressions of the dies of that medal were available. He won a prize for die sinking, as announced on the 10th of July 1875 at the Brisbane National Agricultural and Industrial Association exhibition. And with a mouthful like that, you'll know why most people in Brisbane refer to it as the Ekka. The next name on that prize list for die sinking was the noted prominent Brisbane silversmith C.A. Brown, who won a prize for silver work. Kapner was the die sinker of the N.A. and I.A.'s 73mm prize medals issued in 1877, up until they were replaced by the medals designed by Wyon in 50mm diameter some years later. He also did the die work, as George Snellgrove has said earlier today, for the Queensland Police Medal for Queen Victoria's Jubilee, as well as the rare British New Guinea Good Conduct Medal. He had interests as a member of local government, in grape growing, and was foundation president of the Wine Growers Association of Queensland, which was at that time principally based around Brisbane. He died on the 27th of December 1899 at his farm residence named Aspley. It is now a large suburb in Brisbane called Aspley, between Bald Hills and Cabbage Tree. That's what the newspaper described it. He was aged 67, and to my knowledge there's no known photographs of Capner. So if we can move on a couple to the, here we are, Aurelia Gold Mining Company. I'll tell you a little bit about a chap named Robert Ballard, who was appointed mining surveyor for the government in Gympie around the year 1867, so quite early on in the history of Gympie. He had been a prominent railway engineer, having constructed the Maitland to Singleton line, and from 1878 was responsible for the construction of the Rockhampton to Townsville line, which, if you can imagine that distance, is quite a substantial feat. He had earlier managed the Ipswich to Toowoomba section of rail. In recognition of the sizable savings he achieved by innovative construction techniques, the Queensland Government awarded him £5,000 because on the Charters Towers railway section alone he saved the government £30,000 and finished it 2 years early.
Wow, that's good.
So I think our Robert Ballard might have been a fairly clever chap. So getting on to his connection to the Aurelia Mining Company.
If we could go to think of Ballard next slide, do you want that up?
Oh yeah, just give us a look at that Ballard if you wouldn't mind, yes. Here's our friend Ballard in sort of mid-career. This is from the Australian Dictionary of Biography, this illustration. Will you just take me back to the Aurelia one now? Thanks. Thanks very much. So on the 12th of June 1875, the Aurelia Gold Mining Company was reported as commissioning and christening a new steam mining machinery on the Monkland line of reef. Monkland is also a suburb of Gympie and famous for being one of the areas from which a lot of the gold came out of Gympie. The machine cost £1,000 and was made by Walker & Co, Maryborough, Queensland, which are still prominent heavy engineers in that city and in fact in Queensland. The machine, this is not the mine, but the machine was christened Aurelia Ballard, and like the mine itself was named for the 7-year-old daughter of Robert Ballard, who originated the Aurelia mining enterprise and, according to newspaper reports, predicted to within a stride where the reef, the gold reef, would be struck. So as they're drilling down under the earth, he predicted to within basically a yard or a metre where that reef was going to be. Mrs. Burchell, the wife of the main shareholder of the Aurelia Gold Mining Company, performed the christening ceremony of the machine. Robert Ballard, maybe go on there to Robert if you wouldn't mind. Robert Ballard managed the Australian Aurelia Mining Company's public float on the Brisbane Stock Exchange, where its strong gold production and low operating costs made it popular. By 1893, Ballard had become a consulting engineer at the Mount Morgan mine, the other very significant gold discovery in Queensland, which is near Rockhampton. Then later moved to a large mine in Kalgoorlie, Western Australia. He retired to the United Kingdom in 1901 and died there near Bath in 1912. It's perhaps an insight into the man that his wife and family remained in Rockhampton. So read into that what you may. I'm only presenting the facts. Could you take it on a couple more? The picture of Aurelia. Before we get to Aurelia, but seeing she's the most memorable name in the whole exercise, we might as well have a look at her here. But I'll go on to say that at the 1880 Sydney exhibition, that's what they called it, the Sydney exhibition, not the show or anything like that in the newspaper reports in Queensland, the Aurelia Gold Mining Company had auriferous, that's a nice word, exhibits which, when returned to Gympie, were crushed and yielded 149 ounces of gold. So remember that number, 149. Interestingly, the Sydney Exhibition Commissioners declined an offer to buy the auriferous specimens from the exhibitors at a valuation of 100 ounces of gold. So it seems to me that they were better at organising exhibitions than buying gold for 2/3 of its value. I feel highly likely that these exhibitions in the 1880 exhibition in Sydney were the same as those that won the silver medal I illustrated before. As noted, the Aurelia mine was named after Robert Ballard's third daughter, Aurelia, whose name is the feminine form of Aurelius, as in the 2nd century Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius. It is derived from the word aureus, which in Latin means golden, and as far as I can recollect, an aureus is 25 denarii. I had not heard of a Saint Aurelia, but apparently there is one, who died in Strasbourg in the 4th century. Aurelia Ballard was born in 1868 in Queensland, married there in 1893, and died in Rockhampton in 1940. It's interesting to note that after 1879, the large medals were replaced, firstly die-struck and then handcrafted silver and gold fob medals with the initials GAMPS. I got that right? Yes, GAMPS. The last letter S being the correct title of society, not association. So it was actually the Gympie Agricultural, Mining and Pastoral Association. It never was a society, as on the cap and the medal. This may have been one of the reasons the struck medal was no longer made. It simply had the wrong name on it. And that's all the information I've got about the medal, but it does say something of Kapner's work, the difficulty in perspective, the sizes of things, the way he's had to work the word medal rather awkwardly around the very large head of the miner, who's portrayed with his candle in a thing or some sort of lighting implement, and all the other features there of mining and agricultural and pastoral activities. Kapner was, I think, a man who was, like a lot of the colonials, doing the best he could with the skills he had to meet a local demand and compete with the international quality of European and in particularly British producers of whatever field they were competing in. And when you consider that medal was produced here, you could never mistake that for a piece of the Wyong family of the illustrious output from the Royal Mint. That's about all I've got to say. Any questions?
Is there any questions, Pearn?
Yeah,
David.
more of a comment than a question as such, but I was interested as soon as I saw that the medal was awarded for gold specimens, and as a long-term mineral collector, which is my other hobby, these days a good specimen of gold on a matrix can be worth multiple times the gold value just because of the aesthetic thing. And of course what you said, they just chucked it in the crusher to extract the gold. That would be a big no-no today because you're destroying huge values just by chucking a good mineral specimen in the crusher just to get the metal out of it.
Yes.
So it'd be really interesting to see what specimens they had, but if they contained 140 ounces of gold, they've got to be something this big, you know, and beautiful sort of quartz reef, and then a highly crystalline yellow metal all over it. That'd be a thing to see.
I don't know how many collectors in this room could afford a specimen of 149 ounces of gold, let alone paying multiples of the value of the gold material.
That's what they go for these days. They auction them, you know, coming out of Mongolia and so on these days. That type of quality of gold, and they're valuable things, rare.
Any other questions?
Does the society still retain the dies, or
The society has no idea where the dies are. I've been up and seen what they've got. They've had any number of moves. They haven't been in their present location very long, but the people who had been there for quite some time that I spoke to knew nothing of dies, knew nothing of this metal. All they knew of was the ones that are very extensively illustrated in Carlyle and Armstrong's book of the mainly handcrafted style.
and is this the only one you've actually seen in circulate?
Well, speaking to Les Carlyle and Hugh Armstrong, this is the only named example that they know. There are some unnamed bronze examples, but they may have been struck at the Sydney Mint as part of them showing what a scale of work they could produce. That's according to Les Carlyle.
All right. Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
So does the organisation still exist?
It does.
Is it still called the Agricultural, Mining and Pastoral Association, or is they changed their name?
No, it's called GAMPS. It didn't change its name. That was the wrong name. So it's still called the Gympie Agricultural, Mining and Pastoral Society.
One other comment. You mentioned Mount Morgan being a great gold deposit too of Queensland. There's an interesting story that one of the original shareholders of Mount Morgan made his fortune there, and he was one of the founders of Anglo-Persian oil, which turned out to be BP. So he got around, that guy.
He was a man to follow.
He made his fortune in Mount Morgan.
Okay.
Before you go, Bernie, Patron John, would you like to do the honours?
Yes, Bernie, together we, both as a convener and patron, we'd love to present you with that.
Oh.
Yeah, you can take
Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, John.
Don't go too far away, because our next speaker, just by the way, we have turned the air conditioner up to 25 if it's okay.
It is
I can
better.
make it 40.
25
Queensland. Okay. It's a great privilege to welcome our patron as our next speaker. John's not only our patron, but he's been a numismatist for 4 decades. He has a very keen interest in the history of medicine and healthcare on coins and medals. He's personally designed 32 medals and had these commissioned. He's now a paediatrician at the Lady Salento Children's Hospital in Brisbane, and he's also a former Surgeon General with the Australian Defence Forces. John's going to talk to us today on Temperance medals, iconography for health promotion. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry, our chair today, and colleagues all. It's a special delight to be here today with my long-standing military colleague Bruce Short, who's all here today, who will be following me today. Bruce, it's wonderful to have you with us, and colleagues all. Some 2,000 years ago, the great Roman senator and orator Cicero wrote a book which he called On Old Age. And I quote 2 lines from that book. "Exercise and temperance can preserve something of our early strength even in old age. And so therefore, the temperance movements have a 2,000-year history. They also have a very rich numismatic heritage, and I know that there are many colleagues of you here which have collections of temperance medals. What I'd like to do today would just be to briefly review the origins of temperance societies, and then show some examples from my own collection. Temperance movements had their genesis, their origins, in three quite distinct and disparate movements. Firstly, there was religious advocacy for, in fact, was not strictly temperance, but total abstinence. Secondly, in a non-religious way, the promotion of welfare philanthropy concerned individuals in society, seeing the ravages of inebriation and chronic alcoholism and the devastation that can produce domestically and in the micro-society in which sufferers might live and work. But thirdly, in my own context and special interest, a perceived need for improved discipline and performance, particularly in the military and particularly in the Army and Navy on overseas service. Religious organisations promoting abstinence, in fact, were established in the United States firstly in 1808. They were firstly introduced in Massachusetts, but the temperance movement in Europe began in Ireland, not unsurprisingly, in 1829 with the formation of the Ulster Temperance Society. Norway followed in 1826 and Sweden in 1837. The theological base for temperance had its fundamental doctrine in St. Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, and I quote his exhortation to the Thessalonians, "Watch and be sober." Devoted Church of England and other Protestant members then promoted the formation of temperance societies. And in 1832, and I quote, 7 men of Preston signed the pledge to abstain totally from alcohol. Signing the pledge became a defining societal reform movement throughout the Western world, and it became a major feature of Victorian life. The Church of England Temperance Society was founded in 1862, and the Women's Christian Temperance Organisation, the WCTU, was founded in the United States, in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1874. It was the successor to one of the founders of feminism, the Women's Crusade movement in the United States. WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, promoted protection of the home, initially through their advocacy for total abstinence from alcohol, but later their campaigns against tobacco and harmful drugs. The Band of Hope, an organisation which exhorted children to sign the pledge for total abstinence, was founded in Leeds in 1847, initially with a modest 200 signatories. But the abstinence movement spread very rapidly indeed, and by 1847, incredibly, 1 in every 5 British children had signed the pledge. The movement spread to all Commonwealth countries, of course, including here in Australia. And in Sydney, the publication, the Australasian Home Companion and Band of Hope Journal, was published from 1856. Again, incredibly, by 1891, 2 million children in Britain had joined the Band of Hope and signed the pledge. And subsequently, in Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee year, as we've heard today, in 1897, 3,200,000 British children had signed the pledge as members of the Band of Hope. To this concept of total abstinence philosophically sat comfortably with the Protestant churches. Total abstinence became a core theological impost added on to early biblical doctrine, especially it became the doctrine of Methodism, Congregationalism, and the more strict branches of the Presbyterian Church. The philosophical charities and lodges also promoted temperance, and in the case of Rechabites, total abstinence. The Independent Order of Rechabites was founded in Manchester in 1835, and the lodge's name derived from the biblical Rechabites in the Old Testament, who were commanded, and again I quote, not to drink wine and to live in tents. The branches of the lodge were, and they remain today, I understand, still called tents. Barry, the Star of Tasmania tent of the Rechabites, was founded in Tasmania in 1843.
There you go.
And the certificates, the jewels and medallions of the Rechabites depict scenes today of justice and plenty with mottos such as truth and temperance, and temperance, fortitude and justice. Now the military temperance organisations had their origins in India, where, and I quote, boredom, isolation and access to cheap liquor made drinking alcohol an inevitable part of military life in India. A devout Baptist military officer and army officer, Lieutenant Henry Havelock, formed a pioneering temperance organisation in his regiment, the 13th Light Infantry, in 1834. But his advocacy and that movement spread rapidly, and within a decade there were more than 50 separate military temperance societies. The Reverend George Gregson formed the Soldiers' Total Temperance Association in Agra in 1852, and by 1866 that association had 1,200 uniformed members on its books. As late as 1917, the famous British general, Sir Reginald Clare Hart, VC, wrote, and I quote, every experienced army officer knew that practically all unhappiness and crime in the army is due to drink. General Hart had won his VC in the Second Anglo-Afghan War in 1879 in the Bassa Valley. He'd served in India and he well knew the ravages of alcohol in the British Army on operational service, men serving away from their families for long periods far from home. And the Army Temperance Organisation continued its support and influence of temperance throughout the World War IIs until the final disbandment of the Army Temperance Association in 1958. One of the most enduring and respected abstinence societies is, of course, Alcoholics Anonymous. It was founded as recently as 1935 by Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith in Ohio in the United States, later moving their headquarters to New York. As many of us know, the 12 steps of AA derive from its threefold doctrine. The first, that one acknowledges the help of a higher power, and that to remain sober, one needs alcoholic support from another alcoholic to work with him or her in their attempts to resist the urge to drink. Secondly, that one in AA adopts the 24-hour concept to endeavour to resist the urge to drink by promoting the temptation for 1 day, 1 hour, or 1 minute if possible. And thirdly, to acknowledge that alcoholism is a lifelong illness whose cure is total abstinence. Alcoholism, as we all know, is a tragic personal affliction, and the social evils which accompany drunkenness involve us all. It involves me particularly, of course, as a paediatrician caring for children from homes with parental abuse, not infrequently due to alcoholism. Now, all these temperance societies issued medallions and medals. Some were in silver, others in bronze, some in copper, some in tombac, the cheaper alloy of zinc and copper, sometimes with the addition of lead. Some of the medals were carried as pocket discs, some as suspension rings on a ribbon as an affirmation of an individual's association with total abstinence. After bestowal or issue, some were held or suspended by a chain or cord worn as a pendant, as one's witness of their professing abstinence from alcoholic liquors of all types. Now, there exists an enormous literature, of course, on the temperance and abstinence movement, and a very large literature on the numismatic themes of temperance badges and medals. And I'd just like to illustrate a few of these in these few minutes together today. This is just a feature of the many different medals. There's been books written on the numismatics of the Temperance organisation, and again I acknowledge that many of you will have your own collections of abstinence medals. What I'd like to do this afternoon is just briefly to look at the iconography on those medals and there are several themes, as we can see. There are themes of religious symbolism because of this background in promoting total abstinence. Again, it's a slightly hypocritical approach. It's not temperance, it's total abstinence, which most of us were talking about. But the importance of social welfare in removing particularly chronic drunkenness, symbols of triumph and esteem for those people afflicted with alcoholism, where alcoholism is also portrayed as a terrible disease, and the conquest of that disease, as we'll see in just a moment, is portrayed in this iconography. And then the use of the employment of many abstinence societies in identifying with great heroes as patrons of abstinence was also used on the medals. So these are just some of the medals, nearly all from my own collection. I just wanted to show, this is an Army Temperance medal. The iconography, as you can see, are the crosses. Again, the Crusader cross, the 8-pointed cross here, with the esteemed laurel wreath of a non-fruiting laurel here, promoting esteem for somebody who was awarded this medal by his abstinence temperance society for 20 years of resisting having a drink. And this one here shows the iconography of St. George impaling the dragon of disease, the disease of alcoholism here. This next one shows this is the reverse of one of the American abstinence society medals, portraying the peace and plenty in a home where, particularly in those days, the father was not drinking. And as you can see here, below the exurge, it's got here a house of temperance. The next one here shows just the obverse of one of the Army Temperance Association medals with the exhortation, you remember, from Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, again, watch and be sober. And the reverse of that medal, the army, that particular temperance society with its army in India. The next one shows the Band of Hope medal with its. Remember, this is a model one. This is some sort of gilded aluminium medal. It's extremely light and very cheap. But again, you can see the multiple religious iconography of the overall cross. And if there's any doubt, there's 2 Crusader crosses here, and on the reverse we can see there the fouled anchor, the badge of the Band of Hope, again with the iconography of the crosses. There are some 340 identified heraldic crosses, many of them used in numismatics, of course, in medals and coins. This is called a cross patence, that is the 2-arm cross with that filigree at each of the ends. This is the Church of England Temperance Society obverse. We can see here it has the initials here, Church of England Temperance Society, again with the metaphor of St. George impaling the dragon of inebriation there. And on the reverse we can see here again the same Christian cross with symbolic fragments of laurels here, bestowing, meaning it's a fragmentary metonym of the laurel wreath of esteem for somebody identifying with this. This is the total, one of the total abstinence societies from the United Kingdom. You can read there this was somebody who had signed the pledge, given the medal, a promise with the divine assistance to abstain from all intoxicating liquors there. And on the reverse there one can see again the Christian symbolism, in hoc signo vinces, in this sign, meaning the sign of the cross. You remember the great Constantine story of Constantine seeing the cross in the clouds when he was converted from his Roman religion to Christendom in Constantinople, and throughout Christian iconography now there's in hoc sign, IHS is the symbolism there. We can see here the happy family, here the father and mother, and we can see they're holding up the banners of sobriety and domestic comfort on the right. They're all images portraying the message that the Total Abstinence Societies were promoting. This is the Auckland Band of Hope from New Zealand, very cheap medal. You can see it's been pierced to be worn as a pendant. This is a fruiting laurel. We have our wonderful guest here today is a consultant botanist. You can see Laurus nobilis is the species of this particular one here, with the clasped hands of support for somebody who signed the pledge of the Band of Hope. And here's the reverse of that medal there, as you can see, with the various exhortations for resisting the grog. So wine is a mockery. The bottom there showing a child kneeling in prayer, symbolising, I guess, a house where there's not disrupted by alcoholism. The next slide is a more modern Band of Hope medal there, again pierced, to be worn as a pendant. That biblical inscription refers to Paul's letter to the Philippians, and in that he says, anything can be conquered in my name. And again, the reverse of that medal here, as you can see, this time there's a roseate leaf with the two heavy circlets of a rose wreath here with the exhortation there. Pledge to resist our country's greatest foe. I'm feeling a bit hypocritical, having had a couple of big grogs last night, telling you this story. This medal is not in my collection. It's a beautiful gold medal, but I just wanted to portray it for two reasons. One is it's the Washington Temperance Society. This was a very important temperance society founded in 1840 in the United States of America. And this is the obverse of that medal, showing the bust-in profile of George Washington. I mentioned that some of the temperance medals use patrons and the identity with patrons to promote their message. Now, Washington died in 1799. 41 years later, his memory, as it is today, was still revered. And the Temperance Society, which was founded in his name 41 years after his death, took his name and used it. Now, there's a slight and rather delicious irony in all this, because the George Washington, you know, owned a whiskey distillery in Mount Vernon. He wasn't in for total abstinence at all, but he was into true temperance. That is, not getting drunk too often. But it's a very beautiful, it's a gold medal. And on the reverse, this is the certificate that was given to members promoting total abstinence in his name. They were called the Washingtonians, was the name of members of the Washington Temperance and Benevolent Society. This was a certificate they got, again portraying a tranquil, happy home. And this is the reverse of that medal, as you can see, where members agreed to abstain from all intoxicating liquors. I have an interest in this, of course, as a paediatrician, as a medico, where it says in temperance, the fountain of health. Again, there's a slight irony in this, as you know. There's quite moderately convincing evidence that a glass of red wine a day is pretty good for one's health, provided it isn't much more than that. But this was, in fact, a total abstinence society. This was the original exhortation, watch and be sober, of many of the Army Temperance Society medals. This was the 1897 medal, and on the reverse, as you'll see here, is this beautiful scene from India against the Army Temperance medal, showing this portrayal of these two possibly Indian women. And the metaphor here is that water drawn from the well nearby, pure water, is much better than alcohol. So they're using the metaphor of a beautiful woman, of water, of the well, of a tranquil country scene to promote the image and the metaphor of abstinence. This is a ribbon medal with the original women on it. Another one it's a different society, the Total Abstinence Association, formed in 1862, again with the exhortation, watch and be sober. And this again is another beautiful reverse of that medal, showing this beautiful scene of the two women drawing pure water from a local well. This is the medal which was struck in 1881 for the first international Temperance exhibition. It was held in London. It was held in Islington, in fact, and the certificate that came to encourage people to attend the exhibition, and I quote, it said, and I quote, on display will be coffee and tea making machines in action and a team of bell ringers. And this is the reverse. Again, you can see this derived metaphor again of the well here of pure water, and she has drawn a jug of pure water from the well in a setting of bounty and proliferation and tranquility. This is the Church of England Temperance Society medal with its original ribbon, and again showing the iconography of St George impaling the dragon of alcoholism. And again, this is the reverse of that medal there. Thank you. And I just wanted to finish up just to mention the wonderful work of Alcoholics Anonymous. One we don't know of our colleagues who, of course, are members of Alcoholics Anonymous, but we know that this is the current body which certainly the medical profession believes holds the most significant help for our colleagues who suffer from alcoholism. And in many parts of the world where Alcoholics Anonymous functions, medals are given out. They're called chips by Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's said that, well, they're given out by 1 month's abstinence, 2 months, and so after 12 months one would have 12 chips. This is given after, this particular chip was given for 10 months resistance of having a drink. And it is said that comfort is obtained by somebody who is joined Alcoholics Anonymous in an attempt to get control of their life, and having a chip in one's pocket and feeling the comfort of the chip gives one some sort of encouragement, the enormous courage needed to resist the temptation for another drink of the moment. Thank you. So, colleagues, it's been a delight to share these just few thoughts with you. I'm very conscious that many of you have collections of abstinence medals. There are more than 120 different abstinence societies were formed. They all produced medals, coins and badges of one sort or another, but they illustrate something that is very important and remains very important in the world of preventive medicine and public health today. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Barry.
John, when I came to Brisbane, I was state manager of a property company, and it was taken over by T&G, and I inquired what T&G stood for, and they told me it stood for tickle and giggle, touch and go, tender and gentle. They were some of the names, but really it was Temperance in general. And I'm just wondering if you came across Temperance in General Insurance Company, because it was Australia-wide, and I think it might have originally begun with the Temperance movement, and whether you've heard any
No, I can't. There may be somebody, one of our colleagues, that may be able to answer that question, but I can't.
TNG was, I think, it's pretty around the world, wasn't it?
That's right, yes, it was in
Phil.
Just a couple of comments, John. How do they know St George if he just drink? That's the first one. And the second one was, after such a rigid instruction, do you think the Thessalonians ever wrote back to Paul?
We had the wonderful presentation this morning from David about roads, and I took a group of, as a leader of a group at Lindos, which David wonderfully showed us there, and St Paul landed at Lindos when he came to to Greece, and I was just we were joking at lunch that Lindos today, the beach at Lindos is the most popular topless bathing beach in all of Europe today, which Paul would have been shocked about. The first point about St George, St George impaling the dragon is adopted as the pictorial metaphor for many conditions. As you know, the Cancer Society has adopted St George impaling the dragon the dragon is symbolised as cancer, and on a number of postage stamps portraying the fight against cancer, the metaphor of St George and the dragon is used. And of course, it was used extensively by both Axis and Allied powers in their medals, in their war medals, showing this victory over the enemy. Whatever, both sides used that. The dragon being the victim in both sides.
John Mazzini, did the Royal Navy have any such similar?
Yes, they did. Yes, there were Royal Navy ones, of course.
Rum ration?
Yes, but never in the Air Force, Bruce. You'll be pleased to know. that is correct. Yes, there were. In fact, on that first slide I showed, one of those medals is in fact the Navy absence Temperance Society.
Really?
I think on the first one, a medal that was shown, which was essentially sort of elongated oval, that there you referred to it as St George and the Dragon, but it appeared to me that it was in fact Archangel Michael. Yes. With the wings.
Okay, I could be corrected on that. We can. Stephen's a whiz on getting that back for us. You may well be correct, really. I'd certainly.
Archangel Michael, of course, is the fundamental biblical reference on the matter, and St George has come to be understood. It is his earthly representative.
That one. So
it's the wings.
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct, really. Yes, thank you for that. That's wonderful. Wonderful.
And I wouldn't wish you to be in error.
Bertie.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bertie.
John, I wonder if you'd make a comment about the relative safety of drinking the water drawn from the well in India in 1850 and a glass of beer.
Even today.
It's one of the great problems. Traveller's diarrhoea is the biggest cause of people coming to disaster on tourist things now. I took an group of adult scouts up Kilimanjaro 4 years ago. Now, to climb Kilimanjaro cost a lot of money. It cost about $15,000 to go up by the time one's paid fares and paid for guides and all that sort of thing. And our group was okay, but another group went up and they got traveller's diarrhoea from drinking water, which was clear, and they had to pull out on the first day. So they lost an enormous amount of money and didn't get. So it's a very good point, Bertie. Thank you for raising it. Yes, one would never drink untreated water from a well today. It would be much more dangerous than a glass of gin.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John.
Well done, John.
Doesn't John get presented with a medal?
Yeah.
No. He's got a real gold one, I think. It's my pleasure to welcome Bruce Short to give our next presentation. Welcome, Bruce. Bruce is a retired physician. He's also another former Surgeon General in the reserves for the Air Force. And Bruce's keen interest in 18th century British medical history. I think he might be writing a book about that. The topic of his talk today is Serpent, Mythology and Health Symbolism in Ancient Numismatics. Welcome, Bruce.
Those kind words. I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands extending from the Nambucca to the Clarence Rivers and west to the Dorrigo Plateau, the Gympie peoples, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. The first image I've shown here depicts a silver cystophoric tetradrachma, which Colin Pitchfork has a great interest. He's got oodles of them. On the obverse, the System Mystica, a basket or a box containing snakes used to celebrate the mystical rites of the cult of Dionysus. The reverse demonstrates a bow case. Oh, there it is. The bow case is there. You can see that. And on the right here.
I'll point to it, Chris.
Yeah, back there is the Asclepiad serpent on the staff. The letters of AM are above. It's a well-crafted coin, minted in Pergamum about 95 BC, that introduces Asclepius and the snakes to the talk. Next slide, please. Thousands of years ago, Ophidian or snake mythology came to associate serpents with the healing deities that featured in the pantheons of the Chaldeans, Semites, Egyptians, Greeks and Romans. Ancient peoples believed that the gods had divined special favours on snakes. Penguin, snake-like associations embraced on the one hand the realms of the subterranean undesirable underworld through to the typically Greek perception of healthfulness. The Greek perception was signalled by the annual sloughing of the snake's skin, symbolising the casting off of death or the recovery from illness, followed by rebirth and regeneration. The ability of snakes to form circles was construed as a symbol of eternity. The serpent's lidless eyes invoked keen vision and intelligence, and with an internal variable body temperature, this was thought to endow snakes with extreme powers of vigilance. Feeding snake milk enhanced their special powers. The Greeks extended the myth of snakes, believing that snakes learnt their medicinal benefits of plants and herbs from their earthbound habitat. The practice of ophiolatry, serpent worship, is widely attested throughout the modern world. Around 1300 BC, the Hebrew prophet, with an Egyptian name, Moses, led the Israelites across the Sinai desert. Complaints to Moses and God were long and loud, for which the Israelites were punished by God, who sent a plague of poisonous snakes. Ancient Egyptian culture envisaged the world contained good and evil spirits, and some of the spirits took animal forms, such as Apopi, the supreme evil force symbolising chaos, which depicted as a large serpent. Next slide. During Hellenistic Egyptian history, following the conquest of Alexander the Great, a new god was skillfully invented by the Macedonians in order to help unify the Greeks and the Egyptians. The immensely popular Serapis ultimately became the chief god in the cult of the Egyptian deities. His popularity continued through to Roman times, ultimately ending with the edict of Emperor Theodosius I, who banned paganism in AD 391.
Bruce, do you want, there's a David is just giving me a chance. So,
yes, in Hellenic mythology, the gods lived at the top of Mount Olympus, the highest peak on the Greek mainland at 9,600 feet, situated between Thessaly and Macedonia. The Olympian deities consisted of 12 gods in both the Greek and Roman pantheons. By 1600 BC, the centre of the then known Greek world was Delphi, on the northern coast of the Gulf of Corinth. This centrality was marked by a symbolic representation of the navel stone, or omphalos, commonly depicted entwined by a snake. The Delphic sanctuary was protected by a large serpent, Python. Python was killed by Apollo, after which he appointed a young priestess to reside in the innermost temple sanctuary, seated on a tripod and with a serpent entwined legs as the Delphic oracle, which this, unfortunately this coin is not come out well, but that is that depiction. Surpassing all other Greek cults, the oracle's singular importance within Greece was to formulate all major decisions and to foretell the future. Paradoxically, the Delphic oracle made no efforts to provide political unity within Hellas. The Greek race never became a Greek nation. Pan-Hellenism could not compete with the compelling local independence of city-states. There were many healing gods within Greek and Roman pantheon. Apollo, a name common to both Greek and Romans, was regarded as the supreme god of healing, of prophecy, poetry and music. Hero gods with a health association included Asclepius, the Dioscuri, Heracles, and the gentle and well-educated centaur Chiron. With the growing sophistication within Greek and Roman societies, the need for a separate god of medicine soon emerged. The problem was solved by the invention of Asclepius and the choice of the mythological Apollo as his father. On the slides, I have chosen the common usage of the intermediate English spelling Asclepius. Next slide, please. Inscriptions from the Mycenaean Greek civilizations, 1600-1100 BC, suggest the worship of Asclepius as a god, though around 900 BC, Homer in the Iliad was the first to recall the myth of Asclepius, writing about his two sons leading a contingent of men to Troy. Asclepius was a very unusual type of hero, found nowhere else in Greek mythology. He had to work for a living. Next slide, please. Asclepius is depicted on coins and in art as a bearded, middle-aged or elderly man, standing or sitting, holding a snake-entwined analeptic or restorative staff. Over his left shoulder is a himation or long cloak, exposing his right chest. Unlike the Olympian gods, Asclepius was never represented nude. The origins of the staff are conjectural, but early Greek doctors were itinerant, the roads rough and lonely, the staff doubled as a walking aid and as a means of self-defence. On coins, the staff was depicted either as short and handheld or long, as here, resting in the armpit as a crutch. Next slide, please. The most popular myth as to why Asclepius chose the snake as a decorative image involved a patient named Glaucus, who had been struck dead by Zeus's thunderbolt. Whilst Asclepius attended Glaucus, a snake intruded and Asclepius struck him with his staff. A second snake immediately entered the room and administered herbs to the dead snake, thereby reviving him. Asclepius seized the significance and gave the same herbs to Glaucus, successfully resuscitating him. Thereafter he adopted the coiled snake as his badge. Herpetologists consider the Asclepian serpent was a common and harmless constrictor, growing to lengths of a little under 140 centimetres, moving with great speed and an adept climber. Its prey is mainly small mammals and nestling birds. The same snake was introduced into Asclepian temple medicine, where a lick from the snake could heal the sick, as well as keep the temple free of plague-transmitting rats and mice. The proud Greek and Roman housewife preferred pet snakes and weasels to eliminate mice and vermin in the household, regarding the domestic cat as exotic. It was not until the 2nd or 5th centuries AD that cats supplanted snakes and weasels. Next slide, please. The original sculpture of the image of Asclepius was found at Epidaurus during the second half of the 4th century BC. Epidaurus is situated on the coast of the Saronic Gulf in the Argolid, northeastern Peloponnese, and was home to one of the largest Asclepian medicine temples in the ancient world. The sculpture is housed today in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. Asclepian legend included his large family. His wife, Epione, was initially heavily involved in the provision of health, preparing and administering medicines, but with a growing family, she became less involved. His older sons, Machaon and Potidarius, were both doctor soldiers, the former a surgeon soldier and the latter a physician soldier who was said to have cured Ajax's madness. Next slide, please. Much later, around AD 190-200, I'm sorry this doesn't come out so well, this is the area I'm pointing to, just there. Telosphorus was added to the family. Telosphorus is credited with saving Athens from an epidemic and is depicted as a small figure clothed in a hooded cape with arms muffled in his mantle. John Pearn has written that Telosphorus, with Asclepius encircling him with paternal and protective arms, is a representation of paediatrics, or the positive health of children. Telosphorus developed his own cult around Pergamum as the Greek god of convalescence. His Greek name literally translates as bringing fulfilment from the gods. Additionally, it had been suggested he may have been the divinity associated with sleep, perfect health, magical healing, and even bloodletting. Asclepius had 3 other sons recognised as at local centres, but had no participation in Asclepian temple medicine. Of his 4 daughters, only Hygeia, next slide please, partnered Asclepius in temple medicine and achieved full divinity. Her 3 sisters were not associated with temple medicine. Hygeia's role as the goddess of health survived to the present in the modern terminologies of hygiene and hygienic. The original bust of Hygeia, about 360 BC, is on display also at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. Next slide, Steve. The reverse shows Hygeia standing, facing head right, wearing a stolo, long dress, holding a snake. In her right hand, feeding a libation of milk from a patera, a shallow bowl without handles. Next slide, please. In Roman mythology, Hygeia's name was Salus, whose health role extended to the protection of the emperor's health and the state's well-being. Next slide. Itinerant Greek healers were termed Asclepiads, that through misuse came to denote physician, and became synonymous with the term iatros, physician. Iatros did not become Romanised, instead was replaced by the Latin medicus, doctor. Islamic medicine took Asclepius out of myth and placed him in history, remaining in the Arab version of the Hippocratic Oath. Next slide. No talk on ancient medicine would be complete without a brief mention of a physician of immense fame, his authority, influence and esteem, practising during the 2nd century AD, with an impact on the practice of medicine that continued up to the late modern period. Claudius Galen, the very symbol of the educated physician, was born in Pergamum in modern Asian Turkey and died in Rome in AD 216. At the age of 39, he was appointed imperial physician to Marcus Aurelius and his co-emperor and son-in-law Lucas Verus. Unfortunately, Galen's intervention was not successful, and Verus died of the plague in AD 169, replaced by Marcus Aurelius' son Commodus as co-regent. Unlike the first identifiable physician in all history, the Egyptian physician Imhotep, deified around 600 BC, Galen received no apotheosis and thereby remained a mere mortal, and nor was he of imperial status, and consequently there is no numismatic imagery. Next slide, please. I would like to talk a little about the curious misrepresentation of the caduceus as a symbol of modern medicine. The caduceus depicts 2 serpents facing each other, entwined at the upper end of a thin staff, unlike the thick Asclepian staff. Originally, the caduceus was only an olive branch, later formed into snakes and developed as a symbol of peace. The Romans did not use the caduceus. Instead, they employed clumps of herbs, verbanae, as a sign of peace. Over the top or finial of the caduceus staff acquired modifications with a pair of wings, a pine cone or a disc. The caduceus had no medical, symbolic or emblematic significance until 1556, when John Keys introduced it as a part of the ceremonial procedures of the College of Physicians of London, better known then as the King's College of Physicians. During Greco-Roman times, the caduceus evolved as a symbol mainly of Hermes, or the Latinate Mercury. Hermes was a younger god in the Arcadian myth, the son of Zeus, a messenger of the greater gods, especially Zeus, rather than an independent actor. He took on a young human form as a herald, equipped for travelling, with a broad-brimmed hat, with wings, a stout pair of winged sandals, wearing a short coat, the chlamys, carrying a caduceus or herald staff. Hermes presided over the common intercourse of life, road traffic, journeys, boundaries, and those who use the roads, including thieves. Hermes would today win himself a full-time job sorting out Sydney's road congestion. He was the guide of the spirits of the departed to the house of Hades, a god of the marketplace, or the agora, and the business that went thereon, or therein. He was the patron of shepherds, of young men in the gymnasia, their athletic exercises, and the god of luck, of those undergoing athletic contests. He was an orator, the inventor of the lyre, and the general patron of literature. Hermes cum Mercury was a very busy young god indeed. We can blame the Americans, definitely blame the Americans, for misplacing the military designation of caduceus to the medical services. In 1851, the US Army selected it to be worn by non-combatant hospital stewards, compounded in 1871 by the US Public Health Service adopting the caduceus as its symbol. The medical department of the US Army in 1902 adopted the caduceus in spite of the British, French and Prussian medical services correctly utilising the emblematic Asclepian staff. I must add that in the early 19th century, the Royal Navy's surgeon's uniform featured a blue cloth jacket with 8-buttoned single-breasted pattern, incorporating large pockets and cuffs with 3 buttons affixed, made of brass or animal horn, bearing the embossed letters RN, an anchor, and introduced a serpent device impressed onto the button surface. The use of the hermetic caduceus is therefore at complete odds with the practice of medicine, representing Hermes Psychopompus, the guide of ghosts of souls along the pathways to the underworld, through to the gods of thieves and the busy herald to the god Zeus. All in all, very clearly a totally unacceptable symbol for the profession of medicine. The Serpent Health Society has an extensive history with genesis in the mythologies of many ancient cultures. The serpent mystery is irrevocably embedded in the modern understanding of the oathed symbolism of protective good health. The serpent has eclipsed its god master Asclepius as the lasting motif of medical disciplines in the contemporary Western world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bruce. Any questions? Got plenty of doctors here, so.
Wonderful talk, Bruce. It's very interesting that many of the foundation myths for life, not myths but legends or profound beliefs, in many countries of the world also use the chthonic or underground serpent or reptile. One thinks of the Chinese dragon, for example, as that, who thinks of the rainbow serpent. In many of the Australian indigenous Aboriginal peoples, the feathered serpent of the Olmecs, 2000 BC in Central America, and the Babylonian serpents as well as one of the foundation powerful gods of life. You know, it's amazing that there would be this universality of a reptile as a life giver or a life preserver.
One interesting contemporary but sort of modern interpretation, which is a very pleasant description of our rising sun and setting sun, is mentioned there to you the word Popi, the terrible serpent of the most evil of all evils in Egyptian thinking. He was had an offset person who stood at the entrance to the underworld in the Egyptian deities, that each morning Ra, the chief god, would rise in the east, and this serpent would attack Ra, and Ra always beat the snake, and the thoughts were that the spillage of the snake's blood gave the sunrise, and in the afternoon the sun setting was the serpent's blood. I think that's a wonderful tale.
With so many snakes appearing on these coins in early days, have you come across it all? Were there snake breeders back in those days?
Oh, indeed.
There was?
There was, indeed. This one here, for example, was taken symbolically for some rites in the cult of Dionysus. And these snakes were extraordinarily common in the ancient Greek world, for one. So they had some, it was as common today as we'd see dogs and cats in the street. They were very common. And they had some belief that they had this mystique of being able to perceive things which human form could not.
Yeah, we've got a snake breeder next door to us, and we get the odd snake as well.
Yeah.
But something that was intriguing, they laid something like about 28 eggs one time, and each of the snakes weighed 25 grams. And would you believe, in one egg, 2 snakes hatched out. One 17 grams, one 8 grams. Yeah, I like snakes.
Any other questions?
Yes, I've got a
Yeah, John.
Bruce and I know that the Aesculapian snake of Asclepius has been identified from sites around the sites of the old Asclepiaea in Greece. The species, in fact, is Elaphe longissima, and it's wonderful that that's a real snake still there, the identical snake around the staff with the entwined.
John?
Yeah, it's mildly poisonous, but not the danger.
Middle time, John.
Jerry, to Bruce. The snakes which appear on the Christophora tetradrachms is now going through an extensive rewriting of all the known examples by the American Numismatic Society. And the young lady they're working on, I was there earlier this year, and she's basing it around the Rick Shonky's collection, which is one of the great collections that was formed, and there were some 50 or so examples that were in my collection, which was 50 or whatever. And she's got mine now, so she's putting together this big corpus of all the known cystophoric tetradrachms, which is enlightening because as a coin they don't look very exciting or attractive, but they've got such this hidden meaning that you brought forward, Bruce, which makes it quite interesting and very important. Thanks very much for your talk.
Bruce, I've got one question. Is this symbol used in New Zealand for medical, because there's no snakes in New Zealand?
They venerated the eel.
Oh, it's called the eel. That's a good idea. Okay, that's a Maori. John, Bruce. Thank you very much, Bruce.
Thank you.
Well, we're tracking pretty well time, ladies and gentlemen, so
Time for a cuppa.
time for a cuppa. Hopefully afternoon tea will be down shortly.